The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Look, I think I'm going to have a few fights tonight with Warren Ingram, a financial advisor and co-founder of Galileo Capital, talking about the high cost of treating yourself. I mean, we work so hard. The chips are down. The economy is bad. The petrol pumps, the prices are high there. We deserve a little bit, at least a little bit of indulgence here, Warren. But in our personal finance feature today, you're going to be keeping us accountable and making sure we take care of our money. But why is it so wrong to spend a little bit on ourselves, Warren?
It's always a good idea, Motheo, to spend your money wisely, and sometimes treating yourself or rewarding yourself is the wisest thing you can do. But very often, I think we don't do it very intentionally, and sometimes we're doing it, very impulsively and maybe for the wrong emotional reasons, and then what you find is you end up spending money that you don't have. So you end up, on the card you tap and go on your phone, and you're doing $50 here, $600 there, $1,000 there, somewhere else, and very quickly you look back over a year and you've spent tens of thousands of rands on stuff you don't need that actually meant nothing, and that's where you get yourself into trouble.
But there's a reason why the lipstick effect, is in effect in the retail market, right? If I'm not feeling too great, if I buy something small for myself, whether it's a cologne or a lipstick if you're a lady, or a new pair of shoes, it just keeps me motivated, keeps me going. Can't be too bad, can it?
It can. I guess this is where the fight starts. So it can be bad because it's that psychology of, I'm having a tough time, I deserve it, and so I'm just going to buy something to make myself feel better, and that's great. I mean, if it's affordable and it's something you've budgeted for, that's no problem. But if you're just doing it on impulse because you feel down today, the kick that you get, that emotional kick, it lasts a few seconds, and then it's over. And sure, you've bought something, but it's not really something that's going to change your life. It's something that makes you feel better for a few seconds, and then you start to feel even worse than you did before because the credit card's a bit bigger now, the debt you owe is a bit higher, and the interest rate is a bit more, and so now you start to feel a bit worse again. And guess what happens? You buy something else to make yourself feel even better. It becomes a very slippery slope very quickly.
Look, Warren, a purring engine or even a really good cologne could change your life. All right? That's my argument. But looking at, the spending here and there, when does it become a trap? Because there's obviously nothing wrong with spending a little bit, but when does it become a trap when you know that it's now affecting the whole structure of your finances?
I think it's when you're doing it unintentionally. In other words, impulsively. It's wrong to say mindlessly because that implies we're not thinking. But it's when we do it with our heart and not our head. And so I would say that impulse feeling is a real trigger. So if I'm in a situation like this, I'd be saying to myself, set aside some money, whether it's monthly or if monthly's too long a period, then maybe weekly, to say, I've got some money, and it's whether it's $500 or $5,000, it doesn't matter what the number is, but that's my money for fun. That's the money that I can spend guilt-free on the things that I want. They are only wants. They're not the needs. It's not buying food and paying for accommodation. It's just the stuff that I need to kind of have some fun and get a return on life. We don't live life on a spreadsheet. We live it out there in the real world. So you should set aside some money. But let's say your number is $5,000, and suddenly the five, you're actually spending $7,000, or you're spending $8,000, or you're spending $9,000. You're taking yourself down. You're actually spending yourself into financial ruin, and that's where the trap becomes an iron cage.
I've never really bought into the notion that you have to cut things like coffee and, because it all accumulates at the end of the day. But how can somebody properly assess whether they're emotionally spending and intentionally spending?
We've got to talk about your coffee habit, Motheo. Like, I think that's one, but we'll come back to it. It's maybe asking yourself, why am I spending this? Why do I want to buy this? And if it's just that pure emotion, I'm feeling down. I'm feeling gloomy today. The world's tough. Whatever the thing is, and there was no plan. There was never an intention when you woke up this morning to go out and spend this money. Then that's probably your first flag that this is emotional spending. And if it's not in the budget, if it's not money that you've set aside and planned for, and you spend it, and it's almost like a cortisol kick. It's like I spend the money and I get a hit of feeling good. It's an emotional burst. That emotional burst is so short and it's so temporary. And what happens is it becomes a bit of a trap. I think you start to find reasons. When you're stressed or when you're lonely or when you're bored or you're anxious, then the temptation is just to buy something. And you see cases where people, if you look at their credit cards, you'll see transactions where they're going into shops 5 or 8 times a day just to buy something to feel a bit better. Now those are extreme cases, but I guess there are a lot of us out there that are doing this without intent. Circling back to your coffee, like, do we need 3 store-bought coffees every single day? Some people do. That's
Feels
how
good.
they function. It feels good, it does, but it's coming at what, 30, 40, 50, 60 rand a shot. And you add those up, and you look at your just look at your statements at the end of a month, and you start to say that's quite a few $1,000. Could have bought a beautiful coffee machine at the end of a year and have a lot more coffee for a lot less money.
You make a great point there. But looking at the line items on the bank statement, that's really telling you where the money is going, is one of the hardest things for somebody that's trying to get their finances together, because of course you have to face reality. You are the one that is causing the financial ruin, and that's often hard to deal with. But how important is it? Is it a monthly exercise or per quarter to look at just where the money's going?
Yeah, I think you're right that it is tough to do. Fortunately, sometimes the banks help us quite a bit now. You look on your banking app, and most of the banking apps will give you a bit of a breakdown as to what you're spending or where. They even often have budgeting tools on the phone already. So you do get a lot of help where they categorize your expenses for you. And so looking at the smaller line items which repeat all the time, week after week or month after month, is probably a very good step. And I mean, the one point is well made. Like we're not saying don't spend, don't have fun, don't do anything like that. That's terrible. Like we as I said, we don't live life on a spreadsheet. So you should be looking at your expenses to say, I don't have a gap between what I earn and what I spend, and that's a problem. So let me have a look and see if I can create a gap without, damaging kind of like my return on life, the return on fun. Like, what can I do that's relatively painless, relatively small, to cut and still have a good life. And I think you'll be surprised when you do go through your statements, what you can cut without much pain. I didn't answer your question, but to me, I think it's probably monthly is my sense. In the early days, it's a bit like getting a training program. You have to look at your training program every day when you start, but after a while, you know what to do, and then you develop the memory and the muscle, and you don't have to look at it all the time. So start monthly, and maybe then you jump to quarterly, and then every 6 months.
It's an old age practice, keeping up with the Joneses, Kumalos, the Naidus, the Mufukengs, and our parents did it. We watched them do it. If the other family had a TV, we were also very soon going to get a TV. But that still exists, and it could be even a bit worse in the world of social media, where you're seeing people post just successful stories about themselves, and you want to keep up.
I think it's social media platforms have made this comparison problem hundreds of times worse because it's being bombarded at us, pretty much from the time we're awake. If you walk through any mall and you look at mom, dad, and two kids sitting at a table, they're not talking to each other. They're on their phones looking at something. And this thing of doom scrolling, it's often comparing. It's looking at people posting in theoretically their best lives. And so you can't help but become a little jealous when you see someone leaning against a nice sports car, or standing in front of a fancy house, or on an island somewhere. And if you see that time and time again, and you look at your own life, and you're controlling your spending, and you're not going on fancy holidays because you can't afford them, you start to feel a bit jealous. It's a natural thing. What we always need to remember is we don't know what's on the other side of that camera when someone's taking those pictures. Usually, someone's leaning against the sports car because they just walked past and it's not theirs, and now they're saying living my best life, and taking photos in front of like someone's house that's not theirs, and going on holidays that they can't afford with enormous credit card debt and incredible stress. So what we see on social media is in no way a reflection of someone's whole life, but we get trapped into this comparison story, and so we feel worse about our lives. And the sad thing is we might be living an incredible life relative to the people that are posting stuff on social media, because they're just posting a tenth of the story, and the 90% of the story is really hard and really tough.
And retailers and marketers really pounce on this, because we can often make these purchases swiftly by just using our thumbs, right? We don't have to go to a physical store to do this, and the impulsive spending is far more quicker than it used to be. So you could easily change your mind, saying you're going to go to a shop later and say, actually, I don't need that. But when it's in your phone, it's much easier to make the poor decision.
You don't even have to leave your couch. You look at something that someone's wearing and you go, I would love that, that pair of shoes, or that new sports watch, or whatever it is. I'm just going to buy it, and I don't even have to get off my couch to go anywhere. It'll get delivered. I just sit here and it'll come. And so that, the combination of online shopping and delivery and the social media engine just pumping all this kind of noise at you all the time, it's sort of addictive, and I think it's very tricky. So for me, I think it's maybe understanding this comparison thing. You need to zoom out a little bit and go, hang on, this is not real. Like, this is as much of a fiction as any movie or any cartoon that I'm watching. It's just a representation of something, a moment in time, not someone's life.
And those zeros, of course, do add up every time. I mean, we're having a conversation here about not treating yourself. I know we should have one about treating yourself, but Warren Ingram, financial advisor and co-founder at Galileo Capital, in our personal finance feature today, just giving us a sober assessment of where our finances should be, especially when we claim we're just treating ourselves. But that could leave us in a big debt trap. More after this.
The Money Show. Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Warren Ingram being quite strict with all of us and making sure our finances are in order, and stop treating yourself or overindulging. We have a caller, Ryan in Fourways, talking about how to make sure you can spend your money wisely. Ryan, are you better than me? Are you spending your money wisely?
Thanks so much. I'm trying to. I was taken aback by the call, because by the advice, because I completely understand what it's like wanting to go and get a high from basically buying new pair of tackies or going out for dinner. And a little while ago, I discovered my app for my home loan, my login for my home loan, that allowed me to monitor whenever I wanted my statement on my home loan. And I basically taught myself to let that be that endorphin I get. Every time I want to go and buy something and do a bit of shopping for myself, I would put some money on my home loan. And I couldn't believe how quickly I started seeing my interest that I was paying on my home loan reduce and reduce and reduce. And I stuck to it because it gave me that great feeling. And within a couple of years, I had almost paid off my home loan. And I thought to myself, geez, I feel like we should all try and find a way to get that endorphin rush from seeing that interest that we're paying reduce and reduce and reduce, because it did it for me, and it was so helpful.
Ryan, I think you make a very good point to say we can treat ourselves, but in ways that are financially feasible for our accounts, but also something that's also beneficial for us. And I think, Warren, that's quite a great outlook from Ryan there when it comes to his finances, rather taking care of business at home and the roof over his head and using that as that endorphin enhancer.
I love it. It's like a man after my own heart. I wish I'd thought of that. It is true, and I think it's it's something that if you can find the kick in a positive habit, in a moving your life in a positive direction, that's fantastic. I think it would be the best of worlds. Not always possible for everybody, but certainly it's such a good suggestion. Thank you, Ryan.
So looking at things you can do positively to treat yourself, I know some people might consider it boring to take 500 Rand and save it and try to get the same excitement as you would, maybe going to Bali or Paris, but it could work over time, wouldn't it?
I think it's one of those things that you've got to maybe change it from being impulsive to being intentional. And so for me, it's like understanding what's the thing that really gives you a kick that lasts longer than 30 seconds or a minute. For some people, that would be, planning a holiday at the end of the year, and you say, I'm actually going to work on this, and I'm going to do it with someone special, or I'm going to go with a group, and so the planning of the holiday and the research and the excitement, can last quite a few months in the lead up to the holiday, and then the holiday itself is obviously going to be amazing, and then afterwards, sharing those memories and talking about it, and so you can find a way to kind of get a long-term value from the money that you're spending. And the trick there is allocate the money intentionally. So you sit down and you say, it's in my expenses, I can afford $500 a month, or I can afford 5,000. But now you're working towards a very constructive goal with no guilt. And that's the thing that we've got to get right here is we're avoiding the downside, which is additional guilt, and it's the impulsive side of things. We're still getting the kick, we're still getting the positive rush. But we're doing it in a way where we're in control and we're not being controlled by our credit card and our impulses.
We're often caught up with the instant gratification. What are some of the creative ways we can use to pause the transactions and the spending?
Can you take a day, maybe even two? In fact, 2 days is probably better. Can you give yourself 2 days to decide to buy the thing you want to buy? So let's just talk about a pair of running shoes. Like if that's your thing, fashion sneakers, whatever it is, and it's so easy just to tap and buy on your phone, but they'll still be there in a day or two. Can you give yourself 2 days? And after 2 days, if you're still absolutely convinced that you need to get it, then maybe you take it more seriously. So for me, that's one very good suggestion.
We do have a listener question saying, "Hi, Warren. I have been selling handmade jewelry on Instagram and at markets for about 8 months. I started it as a hobby, but it has picked up over the few months, and I've made just over 45,000 Rand last year from it. I still have my full-time job. My question is, do I need to declare this amount to SARS? I have not been keeping any records. Will I get into trouble?" A key question there.
Great question, and I think a lot of people, do have a side hustle and find themselves in a similar position. So the answer is you absolutely do need to pay tax on this. There is a section in your tax returns where you can put in, I think it's called local business, where you talk about the income that you're earning outside of your normal job. And so, yes, you do need to declare it, and it will be added to your taxable income for the year, and you will need to pay tax on that. So certainly it's something to get in front of now. Maybe just go and spend a little bit of that money that you've earned with a tax person to just help you sort out the history, because SARS is pretty good if you're proactive in terms of going to them and saying, look, I didn't know, it's just been a few months. Yes, it went over a tax year and I didn't declare, but I didn't know that they do have these voluntary disclosure programs. And if you're proactive about it, then they're a little bit more understanding. You just don't want them to catch you out. And then going forward, you do need to keep records because, the fact that you're earning money, you've probably incurred costs, and you can write off those costs against the tax that you're going to pay. So all of your costs for buying the raw materials, etc., you can actually claim back. So please keep the records and maybe just, chat to a tax person to get yourself up and running. And then after that, you can do your own records if you need to.
All right, some sound advice and some gems there from Warren Ingram, financial advisor and co-founder of Galileo Capital. In our personal finance feature today, talking about the high cost of treating yourself, that particular culture, and how it hurts savings and also your finances here in South Africa.